Welcome to the Balance Sheet, where you rise above the noise and learn about the most important business issues of our age. I'm your host and fellow student, Conrad Chua. Today, we're diving into the world of green hydrogen. To its supporters, it's set to play a huge role in the global shift to clean energy. To its detractors, it is expensive, unproven at scale, and will set back other clean energy efforts. To help us make sense of all this, we have Ujjwal Pandey. Ujjwal is a current MBA student at Cambridge Judge Business School. He worked in McKinsey for more than 4 years before his MBA and has a keen interest in green hydrogen. So welcome, Ujjwal.
Thank you, Conrad. Thank you for having me.
Ujjwal, can you tell us, how did you get interested in green hydrogen?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as a consultant in McKinsey, I have worked for 4 years initially. So, I was part of product development and procurement practice. So, I worked across multiple industries, including chocolates, pharmaceutical, electric vehicle, commercial vehicle. But later on during my tenure, I became interested in sustainability. I got the opportunity to work with a client who were manufacturing electrolyzers, which are basically machines to produce green hydrogen. So I work with them very closely, and that is how I got inspired by this topic, green hydrogen. And I personally am a firm believer that green hydrogen is going to be a part of energy mix, significant part of energy mix, and going to help in the energy transition.
Ujjwal, while you were here in Cambridge, you also co-wrote a case on
Yeah,
green hydrogen, and
yeah,
that case was published in the Financial Times.
yeah,
What prompted you to write this?
yeah. So, green hydrogen is such a new topic that there is a lot of buzz around it. But if you try to find a short, concise business perspective article online, you will find it difficult, and that is why we got motivated. So I, and along with Professor Jennifer, we thought of writing something which could be helpful for a business audience as a primary target, but anyone who's interested in the business side of green hydrogen but does not have a basic understanding of green hydrogen, they can actually refer to this case. And that was the motivation to write, and luckily it got published in Financial Times.
So maybe we can start off by, if you could explain to
Yeah,
the audience, what is green hydrogen?
yeah, sure. So hydrogen is defined in multiple colors, and the colors are basically representation of how this is produced. So, for example, the current hydrogen in the market, most of the hydrogen in the market is supplied in form of gray hydrogen, and it's produced using natural gas, which is nothing but methane. And in the process of steam methane reforming, we get hydrogen, and it's like the methane. The chemical formula is CH4, so one atom of carbon, four atoms of hydrogen. When this carbon is mixed with oxygen, it produces CO2 and leaves hydrogen, and that is how we get the hydrogen. But as you can imagine, in the process you get a lot of CO2 as well, in fact huge amount of CO2 to produce hydrogen. uh, Now, where this gray hydrogen is being used primarily in for the ammonia production, which is used for fertilizers as well as refineries, oil refineries. Now that's gray hydrogen. Now, if we move to the next color set, which is significantly, the term is significantly used, it's called blue hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is nothing but the same thing, but at the end, you capture the CO2, which is coming out of steam methane reforming, and store it. So you don't have CO2 in the atmosphere, and the hydrogen that you are getting is low carbon in nature, if not carbon neutral. So that's blue hydrogen. And the last is green hydrogen, which is a different way to produce hydrogen completely. And how it's done is basically the electrolysis of water. It's a simple technique. The electrolysis of water with the clean electricity or the renewable electricity, we get hydrogen and oxygen on two different cathodes and anodes, and we store or use the hydrogen coming from water. That is how it's called green hydrogen. The purpose of saying green is basically saying that there's no carbon emission in the process.
And how does energy get produced in this whole process?
So energy is not produced in this whole process, but in fact, it's consumed during the process. So you need a lot of water. In fact, it also the energy consumption is also dependent on the type of water that you have. So if you're using fresh water, less energy will be required. If you're using, let's say, a sea water, more energy will be required, because for the electrolysis process you need very high purity of water, or else other gases will get produced in the process, and that will not be helpful for the gas that you are trying to get, which is hydrogen. Now, that said, once the hydrogen is produced, then it can be used in other use cases. So, for example, once you have green hydrogen, you can use it to do other things, such as you can make e-fuels, which is using hydrogen and the carbon captured from the air. You can combine it, produce a fuel which will be carbon neutral in nature. You can use hydrogen as an energy source itself, so it can be used directly in some of the cases to produce the electricity with the combined turbines. So instead of using natural gas, you can use hydrogen as an energy source. Or it can also be used as an energy storage mechanism. So, for example, if you have surplus electricity, you can produce hydrogen and store that hydrogen for some time. And once you don't have surplus electricity, or the electricity demand is high, you can actually use the hydrogen and do the using a fuel cell, you can convert back into electricity and get the electricity back. So that is how there are versatile uses of hydrogen, and apart from the current usage, which is ammonia production and the refinery process, where you can use the hydrogen.
That's a wonderful whirlwind tour of basic chemistry. And if anyone in the audience has any questions, please put them in the chats or comments. So, how is green hydrogen going to help combat climate change?
Yeah, yeah. So currently we are dependent on fossil fuels, heavily dependent on fossil fuels. And the problem with fossil fuel is that, I mean, we all know this, but everything is coming from the ground up, and we are just getting the carbon molecules which are stored in Earth crust to and then we use it and then put it in back in atmosphere. And there's no way currently to get this carbon away, get this carbon out of the atmosphere. So we are just dumping carbon after carbon, and that's the reason for the greenhouse problem, or the climate change problem that we have now. In terms of energy transition, the green hydrogen has a versatile use case. So as I mentioned earlier, it's the source. It could be the clean energy source for many things. You can directly use it and burn it to run the electricity turbines that you have. You can either use it as an energy storage to have a fuel cell process and get the electricity back. You can use it in form of convert it into ammonia, and ammonia can also be used as a fuel in some of the process. For example, long distance shipping, that can also be done using ammonia or the derivatives of ammonia. It can also be used in trains. For example, there are a couple of trains currently running in the world on green hydrogen. And for example, long distance trucking. The crucial part is that green hydrogen, or hydrogen in general, cannot solve every problem related to fossil fuel, because fossil fuels are being used across in multiple scenarios. For example, they are used in cars. Now, the argument is that EVs are going to replace the fossil fuel used by cars, but there is a limit. After that limit, you need a different form of energy, which is, let's say, for long distance trucking or a long haul trucking. This is where hydrogen is going to come into picture. So you can see hydrogen is going to perhaps plug the gap across multiple sector wherever this energy transition is required, and wherever those sectors are using the fossil fuels.
So, you've given us a wide range of use cases, but currently, what are the main use cases for
Yeah.
hydrogen?
Yeah, so currently, if you talk about the current use cases today, it's mostly in the form of in form of ammonia, which is where we are producing a lot of ammonia, which is required for fertilizers. It's extremely important because fertilizers are then going into the agriculture sector, and then we are getting our food from that. And the second use case is in the petroleum refining. So when we get the crude, a lot of hydrogen is actually used, because petroleums are long chain hydrocarbons. So hydrocarbon literally means carbon plus hydrogen, and then hydrogen is used to make these long chain hydrocarbons. These are the current use cases, but as I mentioned earlier, in future the use cases could be completely different. So energy storage one, mobility, long haul mobility could be second, third could be e-fuels. So while you have things which are running on fossil fuels, these fossil fuels don't need to come from the earth's crust. You can make it using green hydrogen and carbon captured either through atmosphere or biomass as well. And then fourth is also the sustainable aviation fuel that can also come. So you don't need to change the technology of, let's say, a jet engine, but you can use the fuel which is adaptable for that jet engine, made from, let's say, hydrogen and the carbon captured. So those are the some of the use cases for the hydrogen.
But in those use cases where hydrogen is used to replace fossil fuels, whether that's in an automobile or aviation, is that the case that um, once it is used, you are releasing again CO2 into the atmosphere?
Yeah. So especially on that point where we are making synthetic fuels, the idea is that it'll be a circular thing in nature. So for example, we capture the carbon from atmosphere, we produce hydrogen using, let's say, water or an electrolysis. We make those e-fuels. Once they are burnt, we will release back the carbon back to the atmosphere. So that's the whole circular cycle. We are not adding any new carbon atom in the atmosphere. It's just utilizing what is there already. And that's the logic about going for an alternative fuel using green hydrogen and carbon capture.
We have a question from the audience. Marwan asks, how do we apply an audit on hydrogen before it reaches the end consumer?
Yeah. And if yes, the process. Yeah, actually, it's a great question. Um, and I recently did a presentation in the energy and environment concentration where I looked into this topic, and it is very hard to do the auditing at the moment. And also, it's the auditing is also done by individual companies. So for example, there's an exchange, I'm forgetting the name. They are doing the power trading and energy trading on their platform, and they are saying that they can also certify the production of green hydrogen if it is green or not. Now we do need standardized set of agencies to identify and audit these things, because it's a gap in the market. That's what I believe. I might be wrong here, because these things are evolving day, I mean, one day and the other the things change. But you do need a centralized set of rules as well as agencies to audit, because if you are supplying green hydrogen, you're saying that you're supplying green hydrogen and you're supplying, let's say, gray hydrogen. The arbitrage between the cost is huge, so you can make a lot of money. But yeah, you do need some sort of an auditing agency as well as standardized set of rules across the geographies.
Miguel on LinkedIn asks, you mentioned that freshwater is preferable for green hydrogen electrolysis. If green hydrogen were to scale globally, how would you manage the issue of water scarcity that's affecting many regions right now?
Yeah. So for context, I suppose that desalination could be a solution, but that's an energy intensive process. So once you factor in, yeah, yeah. So it's a great question, and again, and that is why perhaps there's no right answer. But for example, Ireland as a country is actually investing into uh, green hydrogen very heavily. And why? Because they are on the path to convert their grid completely to renewable energy using wind energy, and they have so much of wind energy that's surplus, so the cheap wind energy is available. Also, geography wise, Ireland has a lot of freshwater reserves, so they are strategically positioned to leverage on that and get the green hydrogen out of it, which will be very, very cost competitive. On the other side, if you look at Middle East, for example, they don't have freshwater reserve, but they have surplus amount of cheap renewable energy. So in future, perhaps what it can do is that they use the extra amount of energy which is required to make a desalination process of seawater into a fresh water. They have, again, they are strategically positioned to do that, so they might not have fresh reserve, but they can get those fresh reserve from oceans, for example, because they have surplus solar energy. Now, in some cases where these two combinations are also not possible, then that would be a problem for that particular country or a strategic location. So if I'm assuming, or if I'm saying that, let's say in India, a location like Chennai could be a good hub for green hydrogen production, I think that is questionable, because again there is a challenge of fresh water. Unless otherwise we get a constant supply of fresh water, or we have so much of surplus energy, cheap energy, that we can convert seawater into fresh water, it'll be not cost effective, or might be socially challenging as well to produce green hydrogen.
You've mentioned a few times about the cost.
Uh,
What is driving that cost disparity between producing green hydrogen versus using fossil fuels?
Absolutely. It's a great question. So, first, to give you a context, currently the cost of gray hydrogen is roughly around $2 per kg. It can be more, it can be less, depending on the geography we are talking about. And the reason is that it is heavily dependent on the cost of natural gas. So, for example, during the Russia-Ukraine crisis, the cost of natural gas shot up, and that led to a increase in prices of gray hydrogen as well. Uh, but mostly it's heavily dependent. The gray hydrogen cost is heavily dependent on the cost of uh, natural gas. But on the case of green hydrogen, the cost is okay. So, cost bucket for green hydrogen, first is the capex cost of electrolyzers. Second is the plant capex. So once you have electrolyzers, you have to make those electrolyzers connected to one another with plumbing. You need some sort of electricity supplies connected to each other, and then you need telemetry also. The electrolyzers do talk to each other to figure out how much or what is the load capacity in one electrolyzer versus the other electrolyzer. So you would need a plant capex. And third, in terms of the cost structure for electrolyzer side, is the plant capex. um, Plant opex, which is maintenance cost of the electrolyzers. They don't function forever, they do need sort of maintenance in between, but the largest cost in the opex is the electricity cost. So if I just summarize, what are the two factors which are driving the cost for green hydrogen? It's the electrolyzer cost and the cost of electricity. If we can optimize these two, we can get very cheap green hydrogen. If we cannot optimize these two, the cost of green hydrogen produced will be enormously high. And that is the reason, based on one of the Bloomberg NEF reports, the cost of green hydrogen production currently varies between $5 and $12. That's the variation. And while you see the gray hydrogen is roughly $2 per kg, the green hydrogen is $5 to $12, depending on the geography where you are making making these green hydrogen. Now, uh, in terms of electricity cost, if you find a geography, for example, I mentioned Ireland, where there's a surplus energy available at a cheap price, or for example, Sweden, where there's this company H2 Green Steel, they have cheap hydro energy available for green hydrogen production, which will be used in steel. Um, that is how they can optimize the cost of green hydrogen production along with the cheap electrolyzers. So yeah, to summarize what I said, the cost of electrolyzer and the cost of electricity are two main parameters for green hydrogen cost.
In a functioning world economy, would you see those countries that are blessed with both of those things exporting cheaper green hydrogen to other regions?
No, absolutely. And in fact, there's a McKinsey report which is available online, which says exactly the same thing, that countries which are strategically positioned with surplus renewable energy and significant amount of fresh water, or they have so much of energy surplus to convert a seawater into a fresh water, they are strategically positioned to transition or supply the green hydrogen in future. Currently, the thing is, green hydrogen long distance transportation is a challenge. The way it is being proposed, that we convert it into green ammonia and then transport ammonia from one place to the other, because such transportations are already available. But in future, it might be possible. For example, Kawasaki is working on a ship which can transport the liquid hydrogen from one place to the other. If such innovation happens in future, I believe there will be a significant global market for green hydrogen, where countries which are strategically positioned will take the benefit of their geography to produce the energy source.
Is the challenge for transportation the extreme volatility of hydrogen?
Challenge for hydrogen is that it's such a small molecule that it actually passes through the lattice of any structure very easily. So for example, if you have compressed hydrogen in, let's say, a steel cylinder, for example, and you know that you have capped it completely and you know that it's sealed off, there is no leakage from the cap, still there will be leakage because it's such a small molecule that it can pass through the lattice of steel, and then it can. So if you are transporting from one location to the other location, leakage is to be expected, unless otherwise there's no technology, don't no new technology in the market which can actually cap this leakage somehow. That's one of the challenges, and that is why the current transportation mode for hydrogen is through pipelines. And generally these pipelines are in the location where the hydrogen is getting produced as well as getting consumed. So there's, I mean, long distance pipelines are still possible, but usually the trend is that these two things are developed together in a very close proximity, if not at the same location. However, if you want to transport hydrogen from one place to the other methods could be using either compressed hydrogen at a shorter distance, let's say less than 100 kilometers. And if you want to go more than that, then you need to liquefy hydrogen to transport it to the longer distances. Again, the challenge is that you would literally consume one third of the energy which is stored in that liquid hydrogen to just liquefy the hydrogen. Overall, the conversion of any energy form into hydrogen and back to energy is not very efficient. Therefore, having surplus cheap renewable energy is going to be one of the key enablers to make green hydrogen possible.
Yeah, so to anyone who's watched Knives Out 2 on Netflix, right, you'll remember the role that hydrogen plays in the end of that movie. I won't give out the spoilers, but
Wow.
it's exactly what you mentioned, Ujjwal, about the challenges of transporting hydrogen.
Yeah, and I've not seen that, so I'll just go watch that as well.
Okay. Well, Marwan has a question. So, Marwan asked, based on your previous response, you said agencies should set standards for green, blue, or gray, or other kinds of hydrogen. But which agencies are responsible for setting those standards? Are there ongoing policy making actions going on right now?
Yeah. So in terms, I'll take your second question first. There are policy making actions going on right now because, as I mentioned, Ireland has a national hydrogen policy. Similarly, India also has a national hydrogen policy. So in terms of policy, countries are at a different level. One policy is more clearer than the other. For example, the Irish policy is much more clearer in terms of what they are going to achieve, how they are going to achieve, and what sort of enablers are going to come from the government side, versus, let's say, an Indian policy, which is more of an aspiration rather than a policy. Now, that said, what agencies are we talking about? So I think I don't have an exact answer, but to give you a perspective that, um, for example, there are agencies which certify, let's say, a safety for an automobile, and those are government owned or government regulated agencies. So if there are, now the answer could be, if there are government agencies in UK, for example, I don't know about such agencies, by the way, and I might there might be some agencies which are existing in nature, and they might be doing this sort of certification already. But the way it is possible that the either it has to be a certain set of guidelines, and then certain set of players in the market who will certify the authenticity of green hydrogen or blue hydrogen or gray hydrogen, by going to the site, visiting to the site, of reassuring that there is no way we can mix or produce two separate type of hydrogen and mix it together. um, or government takes control and then do the certification and create a new agency for this sort of certification. I think government agencies will be more will induce more confidence in terms of the kind of hydrogen we are giving, instead of a third party. But both the setups are possible. Yeah. But yeah, the caveat is my knowledge on this point is limited, and hence I will not be able to make an exact comment which those agencies are and how they are going to ensure the green, blue, and gray hydrogen um, differences.
Lawrence, talk goes back to your point about the leakage of hydrogen as a small molecule is a challenge in pipelines. And Lawrence asks, what about composites pipelines that can keep gaseous hydrogen for transport?
Yeah. Um, well, it's a great question. I don't know the answer, but I have read a couple of reports where it's claimed that it's better than the pipeline, the regular pipelines that we are having for the transportation of hydrogen. I I believe that composites are the solution, especially composite with some sort of coatings is possible. And I think these are the solutions which are used for, let's say, storage of hydrogen in the aircraft. For example, I think Zero Avia, they are manufacturing the uh, fuel cell based engine, aircraft engine, to use green hydrogen, but the storage mechanism is composite because it gives benefit of weight as well as benefit on the leakage side. So it could be a solution, but I don't know how successful this solution is as of this moment.
You've spoken a few times about um, how you need lots of plant capex. What are some of the other infrastructure developments that need to be put in place so that green hydrogen could be more widely used?
Yeah, yeah. So uh, I'm going to transition a little bit into the territory of geopolitics and how geopolitics actually can play a role when you asked about what infrastructure support we need. So I'll start with electrolyzers first. Electrolyzers, as you can just simply say, these are big machines to do the electrolysis of water, but it's not as easy. The electrolyzer, for example, now I'm going to the example of PEM electrolyzer. There are multiple types of electrolyzer in terms of technology. So PEM uses catalyst on both the sides, and these catalysts are iridium oxide and platinum or carbon on either of the side. Now, iridium oxide is again very expensive, extremely expensive, and extremely strategic metal, and it's also that only a handful of countries hold the reserve for iridium. So, if you're going to scale up, let's say uh, the electrolyzers and want to produce, let's say, megawatt or gigawatt of facilities, you would need these metals. You would need these metals in significant quantity. So you can draw a parallel between EVs, which uses lithium, cobalt, nickel, and cobalt is, as you know, it's coming from Congo. There's no other place where the maximum supply of the cobalt is coming. Hence, having such clarity of what technology is more favorable for a country, so that not so that these iridium oxide and other such metals don't become a strategic challenge for the country to scale up, is one of the reasons, one of the examples. um, Second would be, so that was the electrolyzer side, where other materials are fine, but these strategic materials are important. So either we should have research and development where we get rid of such metals and materials, or we ensure or secure a supply of such materials from the countries and have some sort of agreements. Because again, either we find new reserves of such material, or the countries who are holding such reserves, we should have good relation with them. Only then we will be able to get this. um, uh, so that's the electrolyzer side of things. Second, the enabler would be having a strong infrastructure in the renewable energy space, where, for example, the electricity of India is coming mostly from the coal fired power plant. So if we set up an electrolyzer and get the electricity which is coming from a coal fired power plant, it defies the logic. So it defines the whole purpose of having green hydrogen. The hydrogen produced will not be green. So we need surplus cheap renewable energy infrastructure to enable or support the production of green hydrogen. I think these are the two crucial things, apart from other things which can be taken care of. But this is the point which is important for any country to move from gray hydrogen to green hydrogen.
Over the last 3 or 4 decades, we've seen the scaling up of things like solar and wind energy
Yeah.
as part of that clean energy transition. But both of those energy sources, they were spurred by a lot of government subsidies or government policies.
Yeah.
Do you think that's got to be present if we want to have more green hydrogen, this sort of government policies and subsidies?
Oh, 100%, 100%, because the production, initial production of green hydrogen, it's very capex heavy, and it requires a lot of support from government, especially in terms of enabling the other things that I mentioned earlier, like having strategic sources of supply of these minerals and materials, as well as uh, availability of green electricity. But on top, the government could be an off taker in terms of buying this green hydrogen at a certain price, which essentially is saying that they will be absorbing some of the green premiums which are going to come. So for example, gray hydrogen is produced at $2 per kg, and green hydrogen is still, after all the enablers in place, is, let's say, at $3 or $4 per kg. That is where government can chip in and maybe take some portion, if not all, in terms of cost for few years, so that it enables this industry in terms of ecosystem, not just producing green hydrogen as well as consuming green hydrogen, and and the economy around it. Once that is done, maybe then government can pull back the subsidies, but initially in the early stages it will be required. And this was exactly the case with the solar. If you remember, it was heavily subsidized by Chinese government, and then now China is the largest manufacturer of solar panels in the world, with the whole ecosystem around manufacturing the solar panel, and no other country in the world is producing the solar panels as cheap as China is doing right now. And same is the case with green hydrogen electrolyzers as well. Now China is controlling the strategic reserves of some of the metals, so they have an advantage, and they already have cost advantage. Chinese electrolyzers are much cheaper than the European electrolyzers, and if this gap has to be bridged, governments do play a critical role.
We have a question from Venkatesh who asks, from your perspective, what's the outlook for green hydrogen demand? And considering those production costs that you just mentioned, are there sufficient takers for green hydrogen?
That's a great question. The thing is, I mean, for the I mentioned the energy and environment concentration. So this was exactly one of the points I highlighted, and we were proposing a marketplace for green hydrogen, and where I did talk to some of the producers and some of the consumers of green hydrogen, for example, H2 Green Steel as well as ArcelorMittal. Um, the thing is, there is a demand. For example, let's take the example of ArcelorMittal. They're one of the largest producers of steel, and they want to transition to green steel. Demand wise, there is a huge demand, only with some caveats, that if I'm getting hydrogen at a certain cost and I'm getting hydrogen for certain years, and this is somehow de-risked by some sort of other security mechanism, only then I'm willing to buy huge amount of hydrogen. And that's the off-takers side. This is one of the largest pain points. Having these agreements, having the constant supply, and having it for the longer years, what is one of the pain point, and they're very, very skeptical. And therefore, I think recently ArcelorMittal declared that they will not be able to manufacture green hydrogen at a competitive price that they were expecting earlier. Which in a way it was a setback. But if you if these two three things are taken care of, then there is a significant demand. Similarly, on the production side, the companies are not jumping into completely for producing green hydrogen, because they don't know who the off taker is, for how long they are going to buy the green hydrogen, and at what price they are going to buy, and how this agreement is going to look like. Is it going to be an agreement with, let's say, ArcelorMittal, for example, where the green hydrogen setup is nearby and supplying green hydrogen to their factory, or how the market is going to explore. But that said, currently I'm talking and taking the green steel example because that is where the focus is. I did talk to one of the other experts, and they mentioned that there will be new market for new market for hydrogen itself. And let me give you an example. So for example, if Rolls-Royce is manufacturing something and they want to decarbonize their manufacturing completely to net zero, then they will also have to ensure that the parts which are coming from the third party suppliers are also decarbonized in nature. And one of the things, for example, is that they outsources the engine blades. And if blades is manufactured by someone, and there is a possibility of using green hydrogen to decarbonize their process to make these engine blades. So what I'm trying to say is that there will be a new market, not just the steel industry or the cement industry where the large volume of green hydrogen will be required. There's a middle market where small but significant volume of hydrogen will be required in future. Key enabler would be cost and the transportation technology. So if we have that, there is a demand, but this needs to be filled with these two things: cost and transportation technology.
On this issue of cost, Elise asked, how do you price green hydrogen with in these contracts? Are they fixed? Are they indexed to inflation?
Yeah, so there are multiple contracts at the moment. I first of all, I'm not an expert in these contracts, so that caveat, I'll just give you the examples that I have seen. I have seen both the contracts. One is a fixed price contract for a very long period of time, which is 10 plus years, and others I have seen indexed. And indexed are usually the short period of contracts, which is somewhat between, let's say, 3 years 5 years, and depending on the price and how it moves, it's generally indexed. So yeah, depending on the period that you are talking, and depending on the size or the scale of hydrogen you are talking about, both of these agreements are in place.
And Elise actually had a earlier question, which was colors as a mean of classifying hydrogen is misleading because that's really the production method. Elise says the industry is moving towards carbon intensity to classify hydrogen sources. Are you aware of this, Ujjwal?
Unfortunately, I'm not, but it's a great point actually. Colors are misleading, yes, because as I said, for green hydrogen, you need to have green electricity. If this electricity is not green, then there's no point. So the point mentioned, like industry is moving toward carbon intensity to classify. hydrogen sources might be right. I'm not aware of it. Most of the mm, everywhere, wherever I've read about hydrogen, classification is still based on the color, even in the reports by IEA or US Energy Department.
And I guess this can, if this was more widespread, then it allows for finer grading of like input costs, right, to the production of green hydrogen. So
Yeah,
that might be useful.
yeah, that
We have one other question from someone on LinkedIn. So, what are specific countries or regions that are primed with surplus renewable energy and fresh water to keep the OPEX low for green hydrogen?
um so I I don't remember all the countries which are strategically placed, and you can by the way refer to McKinsey's recent Energy Outlook 2023. In that, it is clearly shown which countries are strategically located in terms of having surplus energy to keep their OPEX low. But few examples are some Middle East is one such location. Especially, there's a lot of investment in Saudi Arabia already. There is a lot of investment in Egypt already for green hydrogen. So these countries are strategically placed, and also they have significant. I mean, they have government push to implement or have significant investment in green hydrogen. They have capability to do that. Whereas there are other such locations as Africa, where they're again strategically located, but they don't have the capability of getting the investment, foreign as well as domestic, to enable green hydrogen production. But strategically they are, yeah, well located, and they can supply. So uh, if there is some sort of enabler from, let's say, global financial institution, Africa could also be a place where this transition could happen. Ireland, I mentioned, is one such location. Then there are locations in South America as well, and of course India and China. But China is still, based on the projection, China is still much more strategically placed than India. But yeah, these projections are keep on changing year after year, and this is a very dynamic industry. So yeah, with that caveat, yeah, these are some of the locations.
So, Ujjwal, my final question to you is, you're coming to the end of your MBA in Cambridge Church Business School. What have you learned in this 1 year that has maybe changed or refined your thinking on green hydrogen?
Sure, it's a great question again. So I think from my previous experience, I was more focused on, let's say, optimizing the or serving my client to optimize the cost of electrolyzers, making sure that the product is modular enough so that it can be scaled later on. Bottom line, I was very narrowed in my perspective of looking at, let's say, electrolyzer and the overall cost. But when I came to MBA, learned about other aspects such as policy, government initiatives, how the financing actually works, risking, de-risking. So those are the, let's say, key element to holistically look at this problem, and that is how I have broadened my understanding based on the learnings that I got from the MBA.
Well, thank you so much, Ujjwal, for the wonderful tour around green hydrogen and for telling us how green hydrogen is not the, but one of the solutions for clean energy, and
Yeah,
also how we need innovation across the product, but also policies and business models. So, thank you so much, Ujjwal.
thank you, Conrad, for having me.
And thank you so much to our listeners. The balance sheet will be taking a break for the summer. We will be back in August with a brand new season. We'll have episodes on the UK economy, fintech, and working in international organizations. So, till then, stay well, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.